In 1933, the film King Kong would grace cinemas across the country and would become a classic of its time. Japan would also make a few King Kong films of their own, including the one we're about to talk about in this video, titled Kingu Kongu no Gyakushu, translated as King Kong's Counterattack. The movie was a spiritual successor to the King Kong show that was released a year prior to the film, and was created by Videocraft International, later known as Rankin Bass. Rankin Bass had approached Toho to come up with a movie that loosely connects to the show, and what we ended up getting was King Kong's Counterattack, known in the US as King Kong Escapes. Now, as of this video, the Japanese version of this movie still has never been given an official release of any kind up here in America, not even digitally. Universal Pictures owns the rights to the film in the US, and given their lackluster releases on both Toho Kong films, that only include the American cuts, I think it's safe to say that we may never get an official release of the Japanese version of King Kong Escapes, though I would still like to hold out some hope on that. I am aware a majority of fans who love these kaiju pictures usually prefer to watch them dubbed. It just takes away the hassle of having to read your way through a film. But is the Japanese version even worth viewing? The Japanese cut runs about an hour and 44 minutes, while the English version was trimmed down to an hour and 36 minutes. So let's see exactly what those missing 8 minutes are and how much they take away from the original story, or maybe even improve upon it. First is the intros. The Japanese version has some text over a blue screen announcing that King Kong's appearance here was given permission from RKO, the rights holders to the character at the time. A similar message is in the US cut, it just doesn't get an entire screen dedicated to it. The Japanese version also has another message saying Toho's 35th anniversary commemorative release, which obviously was cut out of the American version. The Universal logo is only present in the American version, and the Toho logo is only in the Japanese cut. The opening sequences obviously both have different on-screen text crediting the staff of both versions. They even have the movie title's logo appearing in different parts of the sequence. Our first real change comes in after the credits, where both versions open up with two completely different scenes, introducing the character Susan, with the US version getting an exclusive clip of the character walking by some crewmen, before syncing up where the Japanese version begins. The humor here has a very Western feel to it, so it's no surprise that the Japanese version doesn't have this scene.
Yes, sir, ma'am, Lieutenant.
During the introduction sequence of both Doctor Who and Madame Piranha, the dialogue between them is slightly different in both cuts, with a few alterations. For one, Doctor Who explains the creation of Mechanicon came from the research of both Carl Nelson and Jiro Nomura. In the dub, it's just Carl Nelson who gets the credit. Another small change is done to Kong's doppelganger, Mechanicon. The name Mechanicon is only said in the Japanese version, while in the US version, it's simply referred to as a Robot Kong, or My Kong, as Doctor Who states at times.
My Kong won't tire.
Even the American theatrical trailer refers to the machine as the Kong of Steel. In America, the word mecha wasn't a widely known word at the time, so simply calling it anything but was just a way to not confuse American audiences on what a mecha is. Anyway, when we see a close-up of a Geiger counter, one of Doctor Who's henchmen has a small bit of dialogue that is only heard in the dub.
42,000.
A small bit of footage of Doctor Who saying he doesn't know what country Piranha serves is cut, along with a shot of the villains walking back to the chopper. In the scene where Mechanicon shuts down after digging for Element X, Doctor Who states that the mech stopped working due to a concentrated magnetic force emitting from the deposit, while the dub has him simply say it was done due to the magnetic mass. When the film cuts back to the Explorer after Mechanicon's failure, the Japanese version shows two crewmen looking through a window. Afterwards, we see Nelson viewing some of his Mechanicon drawings. These moments were omitted from the American version. A small cut of Nelson laughing has him doing so immediately in the dub, while the original hangs on him a bit before the laugh. A shot of Nelson and Nomura climbing a hill is cut. A shot of King Kong walking is trimmed down in the US version. A close-up shot of Kong is cut. When Nelson and Nomura run back to Susan, Nelson says,
Over here.
while he says nothing in the original. When Kong starts shaking the Explorer, the American version cuts outside immediately to Kong tugging the sub, while the Japanese version stays inside on the characters for a while. During the scene where Susan goes out to calm Kong down, Nelson asks Nomura to bring her in. However, in the Japanese version, he hands Nomura a rifle, just to be safe. Even though the scene was removed from the US cut, Nomura can still be seen holding a weapon in a later scene. Once the Explorer takes off, a few seconds of Kong seeing the vessel off is removed from the US cut. When Susan looks through the viewfinder back at Kong, a quick shot of the characters inside the sub is removed from the American version. During the confrontation with Doctor Who and Piranha, discussing if Kong can likely resist the radiation, Doctor Who admits that Kong will most likely die during the excavation. However, in the dub, he vaguely says that Kong can resist the radiation, just not forever. There's also another small line change. Piranha brings up that Kong will listen to Nelson, Nomura, and Watson. However, in the dub, Susan is the only one brought up, which makes sense considering that she was the only one who was in contact with Kong. When Doctor Who puts Kong to sleep with knockout gas, a shot of the unconscious Kong is removed from the dub. When one of Doctor Who's henchmen orders the transport, the US version cuts immediately to the men in the chopper, while the Japanese one stays on Doctor Who and his men for a while longer. After Kong is secured in Doctor Who's ship, the Doctor tells one of his men to stay behind and track Nelson's ship. This moment was removed from the US cut. A shot of Nomura and Watson searching for Kong is removed from the US version. A moment where the two are giving the wounded native some water is removed from the US cut. Another dialogue change comes at the end of Doctor Who and Piranha's conversation on controlling Kong. Piranha suggests it would be easy to use Nelson and his crew to control Kong, but Doctor Who angrily replies back that it wouldn't be necessary due to if Kong may not remember them. The dub lowers the Doctor's temper by having him agree to Piranha's idea, but in villainous fashion says that Nelson and his crew would be dealt with afterwards. This line change for the English version does fix what would be a contradiction to the original Japanese version when Doctor Who's men, by his order, want Nelson and his crew to be taken to Doctor Who's headquarters to help control Kong. A shot of the aircraft taking off with Nelson and the others is cut from the US version. A small snippet of Doctor Who yelling at Kong was shortened in the American version. When Doctor Who hears about Nelson being brought to his headquarters, the scene lingers on Piranha for a bit before sinking back to the American version. It's kind of an odd shot since the actress looks a little dazed on what she should be doing now. I don't know, maybe that's just me. A shot of Nelson talking to one of Doctor Who's henchmen is removed from the US cut. A small dialogue detail only present in the Japanese version has Doctor Who admitting his fortress was built in the Arctic just for the fact that Element X is right under his toes. No mention of such is present in the dub. A small bit of Doctor Who laughing is cut. When Nelson is being brought out of his cell, a shot of him and the guards walking is removed. The next moment where Nelson is invited to Madame Piranha's room has all new footage exclusive to the American cut, with even some scenes reshot, and even the music heard in the background is different from the Japanese one, though towards the end, both versions do sync back up with each other. When Doctor Who breaks up the moment and has a small chat with Madame Piranha, the dub cuts back to the main leads about halfway through the conversation, while the Japanese version stays on Doctor Who and Piranha, to which has the Doctor talking about freezing Nelson and the others to cooperate with him. In the following scene, Doctor Who does intend to freeze both Nomura and Susan in the cell they have been put in, to which Doctor Who addresses as an execution room. No mention of the room's name is said in the dub. Another tiny line change comes when Doctor Who is playing chess with Nelson, where the Doctor addresses that they're drinking coffee in the Japanese version, while the dub has it as hot tea. The dub also changes Doctor Who's line when he visits Nomura and Susan. In the original, he says that Nelson has been disposed of, giving the idea to them that he's been killed, while the dub has the Doctor saying that Nelson has been cancelled, which I guess may be the same thing, if a bit more vague. A small bit of Kong shaking the fortress and a shot of the rocks falling are removed from the US cut. When Piranha releases the main cast, there's a bit of footage trimmed down in the US version, mentioning Piranha's country and how she's a foreign agent who has done some bad things. When the guards notice the characters escaping, a scene of more henchmen coming to shoot them is removed from the US cut. A few shots of tanks setting up, as well as a military banner, are removed from the American version. And a shot where we see the military going over a map, dialogue was added to the American dub. while the Japanese version simply has background noise of crowds of people with no clear dialogue. A shot of soldiers running is removed. More shots of soldiers setting up around Kong are removed from the US cut. Another shot of the military moving towards Tokyo Tower is removed from the American version. A scene where Nomura asks for the captain to send the Rangers up to save Susan is removed from the US cut, most likely due to him repeating the same thing in a later scene. After the scene where Doctor Who and Piranha get into a fight, Doctor Who handing his gun off to one of his men, ordering to watch her, was removed from the US version, as well as a quick shot of Doctor Who at the control panel. A little interesting note about the fight in the English dub is that the grunting noises heard between the two are of the actual actors from the Japanese version. Just listen. When King Kong grabs Mechani Kong's foot, a few shots from the scene are removed from the US version. When King Kong puts Susan down, a few shots of bystanders are removed from the US version. A soldier saying "lights on" is heard only in the Japanese version. There's a few scenes that are rearranged in the US version once Nomura starts running up Tokyo Tower. First is a scene of Nomura getting tired, which is removed altogether from the US version. After we see a shot of Susan crawling on the beams, the Japanese version cuts to the Kong battle, while the US version cuts back to Nomura before showing the Kong fight. That scene of Nomura would play later on in the Japanese version. A scene of Susan grabbing the steel beams is cut. A 15-second clip showing Nomura and Susan climbing the structure is removed from the US cut. A few seconds later, there's another climbing scene that was removed as well. A scene of soldiers starting to ascend their way up the tower is removed. 2 shots of the military are removed. A wide shot of Nomura and Susan hanging onto Tokyo Tower is cut. In fact, a similar shot, which has debris falling down, is removed from the US cut as well. Despite the American version removing the shot twice, it was shown a third time in the original cut, and in that time it is left in both versions. A few seconds of Kong getting bashed in the head is trimmed down. An entire moment that got deleted from escapes is of a scene where Susan nearly falls off the tower and is hanging for her life, with Nomura going to her rescue. This was most likely cut out as to not draw attention away from the fight, which is never shown again until after the two are taken to safety. In fact, a later scene with the two walking down the tower is also removed from the US version, as well as a shot of Nelson. A few seconds of Doctor Who ordering his men around is trimmed down in the US cut. A very awkward shot of Kong hanging on the tower is removed from the US version. This scene does play again, only with the camera pulled back more, and is left in both cuts. Also, when Kong roars in victory, music can be heard only in the Japanese version, though it does transition back in the US version when Nelson reunites with Susan. A shot of the crew on a boat has dialogue heard only in the Japanese version, mentioning that the UN has secured Element X, whereas in the US version, nothing is being said. The final shot of the characters seeing Kong off is trimmed down a bit in the US version. And finally, the end title cards are different in both cuts. Oh, and the US version has one last screen listing the main cast. You may have noticed that Madame Piranha is listed as Madame X. No, I didn't screw up on the names, as she is listed as Madame Piranha in various sources, and the thing of it is that she is never referred to by name in either version, with Doctor Who only calling her things like Madame and such. I wonder why bother giving her the villainous name if they were never going to use it. Anyway, the big question is the Japanese version worth your time? Well, it depends on how you look at things. The plot is not a complex one at all, so both versions are pretty much the same in a lot of regards. The US version does tend to censor itself at times, but it does fix some of the dialogue to make things less confusing. Another positive about the US cut is that not only does it trim out a lot of the filler clips, but it also paces itself much better during the climactic battle with the Kongs. A little takeaway about that though is that Akira Ifukube's music score during the match can be heard cutting in and out at times. If you've listened to this man's music as much as I have, you can definitely tell when it's abruptly being cut. but it's nothing that really ruins the movie by any means. It's also really cool that the US version has exclusive footage for itself. There's very little of it and the scenes don't really add much to the picture, but it's still cool nonetheless. And I have to say that the dub isn't really that bad. I think all the voices suit the actors really well. And this is coming from someone who prefers to watch these movies in their original language. So yeah, I think the US cut is slightly superior to that of the original. The Japanese version has a more darker tone with its dialogue in certain areas, but other than that, it's a tad bit below its American re-edit.
You're so right.
Thank you for watching towards the end, and I'll see you next time.
King Kong, Mammoth, Behemoth, Goliath, the Kong of Steel. A gargantuan duel, unmatched by any battle in history.